Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. My guest today, 2 times TEDx speaker, master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine, founder of PassionBody Activation, I believe, featured in Thrive Global, Sway, that's with a double A, and Forbes. I mean, most people will know about Forbes. Author, podcaster, and also a blogger. Please welcome Maria Elizabeth Malley. Did I do it justice?
Yes, you sure did. Well done.
Well, welcome to the show. And I mean, there's one thing I didn't mention, and maybe we can start off on that. You're actually an underwater photographer, because that's even fascinating in itself. But I was looking at your website. You've got some beautiful pictures. But I mean, I would not, if you paid me $1 million, go into the water with a shark. But you're taking pictures of them. So, I mean, you might kind of tell us your photography journey.
Oh, yes. Well, I first learned to dive in 2000, so it's been quite some time. And my first experience diving, it was as if I'd arrived home to the planet where I was meant to be, you know, and I loved the colors, the movement of the fish. And as I got into photography a few years later, I love the challenge of it, to try to photograph something I can't pose, I have no control over, and to have to calculate the light and the position. And, you know, it's one of these things that engages me 100%. And this is something throughout my whole life. I love experiences that bring me into full presence, that bring me into the moment. So that happens for me while I'm coaching, that happens while I'm writing, and that really happens while I'm photographing underwater, especially a shark, because you have to also be watching their behavior and make sure that they don't switch into hunting mode, which they don't usually do, but it's visible when they do. And at that point, typically the humans get out of the water.
And have you, because I mean, like even on your TEDx, like you were talking about the different fish, and I was learning things I didn't know about the fish changing their sex and everything. I was like, whoa,
Yes.
this is weird. But have you had any kind of dangerous experiences? Because I mean, I did scuba diving, and I was diving off the west coast. And actually what happened with us is there was a conger eel swimming around us, which we didn't see, but the instructor did. And at another stage, we ran out of air because we were all excited. And when we came up, the tide was bringing us out and there was nobody else there. And we were panicking, but your man just told us to kind of hold on to the seaweed and then swim. I mean, it was kind of ups, but it was scary. Like, and it just, I mean, what's your experience? Have you got any stories of things that kind of made you think, why am I doing this?
Yes, one in particular. I was in a place called Cocos Island, which is 38 to 42 hours off the coast of Costa Rica. And it's an aggregation area for sharks. And I went there specifically to shoot hammerheads because they have these big schools of hammerhead sharks there. And it's a dive site. If there's any divers listening, you would know this site is called Alcyon, and it has a ripping current. Like you have to hold on to a rope to go down to the bottom and also to come back up. And that particular day, the current was incredibly strong, and it was stronger than my capacity to make it back to the rope. I had my underwater rig, which is this huge rig, under my arm like a football, and I was crawling with my other arm along the rocks, and I was using so much air that I got back to the rope. I actually ended up hanging on to a strong Spaniard, actually, because I couldn't make it back by myself. So I get back to the rope with the Spaniard, and I'm on the rope, and all of a sudden my mask is getting sucked to my face, and I could not figure out what was going on. And it was 80 feet down. And maybe I was a little bit narked because I just could not process mentally what was happening and why my mask was doing this weird thing that it never does. And the dive master, thankfully, was on the rope just below me, and he saw what was happening. He realized what was happening, and he just took my regulator out of my mouth and shoved his regulator in my mouth, because he realized I had completely run out of air. So here we are at 80 feet. I'm breathing off his tank. And we're sharing his air going up the rope, and we're still about 20 or so feet from the surface, and he's running out of air at this point. So I had to switch to someone else's tank. to do the safety stop, which happens at 15 feet, we had to stay there for 3 minutes. So I was breathing off a friend's tank and then made it up to the top. And, you know, I could have died that day. I mean, that was really a true scenario of close to death experience. And I remember being quite shaky the rest of the day and just so grateful that this dive master basically saved my life because he realized what was happening.
Very lucky. I mean, my thing with running under the air was a lot less safer. It was actually in the swimming pool when we were training, and you have like a dive buddy.
Yes.
It was one of my best friends that I'd grown up since we were like 5, and he turned off my tank by mistake. So I went into the water backwards, and it's like, you know, where you just go. It was such a horrible experience because you think you can breathe.
Yeah.
So I had that at an early stage, and then it was like, but yeah,
it's amazing you continued. A lot of people would continue after that.
But what I liked, even when I was scuba diving, there was one part, I don't know, was it like 8 meters or something, and then it's like throwing yourself off a cliff and you're just going down, and it was just, I know, it was just a fantastic experience. But yeah, it's
I love that feeling.
Yeah.
I will say that we did go back to the same site shortly after. Maybe it was the next day or the day after, and the current was still strong. You want a strong current when you're photographing sharks because that actually brings them in. However, the current on the day prior, where I lost my, where I ran out of air, was beyond. I mean, it just was beyond. And so this was a reasonable current, and I was able to manage my panic because, of course, you can imagine panic kind of began the minute I felt current in the water. So I had to count my breaths. But I will say that going in again was the right choice because I went through that fear, and I actually got the shot that I went on the trip to get, which was an overhead shot, or, from below, shooting straight up at a huge school of hammerhead sharks in a beautiful formation. So it's one of my favorite shots because I know everything I went through to get it,
And I think, because I had with my very first horse riding experience was just really terrible. It was, what basically happened is the person I went with was experienced, and they gave me like an old horse. But when we got it was the Gap of Dunlos. It's kind of like dangerous drops and everything. When it got to the end, it started galloping, and the person that was experienced, I was left. And then the thing came off its mouth, and I was just terrified. And it ran back to eat. And I was driving motorbikes at the time, and I couldn't walk for about 3 hours. They were all laughing at me, but I was like, I thought I was going to die because the horse was going so fast, his legs were skeeting. And if his legs went, we were going off a cliff. And it was like, I mean, I realized the danger of this, but what I did is I made sure I've only done it once. I've got on a horse again because I didn't want that to be my story. Because sometimes when we experience something bad in life, we just kind of go, no, never again. And then we make it be our story. So I think, same with you, that in the water, you could have easily just thrown on the towel there and you ended up getting one of your best shots. So it's something. Exactly.
That's such a good point. I think we have to face the things that scare us, right? I mean, and in particular around public speaking, right? Like, let's say you have an experience where you bomb or the talk doesn't go well, which has happened to me before. And then it's sort of like getting back on the horse. You have to get back on that horse too and find ways to speak again or show up and get through that fear that the same thing will happen again, because most likely the same thing will not happen again.
Exactly. And I mean, like for me, I remember my first kind of speech when I done the toast, I remember pausing, and I thought it was like 2 minutes. As it turned out, it was like 10 minutes. It was just like seeing all the eyes as I was halfway through it. And I ended up using that because I got so much comments. Experienced Toastmasters were, giving me support. And new people were just ripping me apart. And I actually kept all the pieces of paper, and I used it as I got into the final 5 countries by using that speech that I had experienced so much emotion, but I just, as fast as possible, I started speaking again. So, like with the big stage movie, that was kind of in connection with that's Kasia and Patrick Wazowski, the Polish, yeah. So
yes,
what exactly? Yeah, so I saw that you saw the trailer of that. So you might tell me exactly what was your role? What was that all about?
Yeah, so I was approached by my speaker coach, who was approached by Patrick and Kasia to make a documentary about her work with speakers. Her name is Trisha Brook, and she works with speakers. She's written a beautiful book called The Influential Voice. And she comes from the perspective that your voice matters. Everyone's voice matters. And your story, especially when you learn how to tell it well and deliver your message well, can unlock so much for other people, that there are people out there that need to hear your story. And it's important for the world to have people speaking about who they are, what they care about, etc. So I was approached by Trisha to be in this documentary, which follows 6 speakers' journeys to taking a big stage. So all of us ended up on either a TEDx stage or Oxford Talks, which is a beautiful speaking series out of Oxford University. And I've done both. And so my particular narrative, so each of us had a challenge that we needed to overcome to be able to take a big stage. And my particular challenge really centers a lot around my voice. I used to sing when I was younger, and then in around somewhere between 2003 and 2005, I lost my voice. It got pitchy, it got damaged, and I stopped singing. And over the years, I also have an MFA in poetry, and I write and recite poetry, and I noticed my speaking voice beginning to also have trouble. So there's a wavery. I mean, you can hear that I have some hoarseness, some airiness in my tone. And as I worked with Trisha and wanted to take bigger stages, this became a kind of crippling issue in my head, because when you're a speaker, you want to have a voice that commands attention, that conveys authority. And my airiness is wonderful for client sessions. It has people feel calm. It has people feel safe. It soothes them. But for a stage, it doesn't transmit the kind of power that needs to be transmitted to move an audience. At least that's what I believed and was told by a voice teacher. So I engaged a voice teacher, and I was working with Trisha, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of my part of the movie centers around overcoming this challenge of the power and strength of my voice, because it can also tend to waver, which conveys fear, which conveys nervousness, weakness, et cetera. And so a lot of that's my story. Other people had different stories. Someone was struggling with anxiety and depression, another one with perfectionism and needing to appear perfect, but that made him unrelatable, and people couldn't feel him, And so each of us, someone else is struggling with a physical disability. So each of us had something we were working through. And what's so beautiful about the film is you get to watch the arc of all these 6 speakers moving to a place where they develop the confidence to take a big stage or more than one. And ultimately the message, I think, is if you want to do this, you can too, right? That it's no matter what fears you have, no matter what is holding you back now, you can work through that, and it's worth doing because your voice matters.
And I'm not sure if you had much experience with cameras and stuff like that, but knowing that it was being recorded and everything, how was that experience for you?
Honestly, the crew was so good at being unobtrusive. So for all of us, we had similar experiences where even if at the beginning it was a little, there's somebody filming, we just forgot they were there. And so the conversations ended up being so raw and so real, because it really didn't feel like we were being recorded. And my story is a little unique because part of it was filmed here in New York and part of it was filmed in Mexico, where I also live. And so, and part of it was actually filmed underwater. So if you want to see the movie, bigstages.com, you can see some beautiful underwater footage by my friend Eric Higuera, who is one of the premier underwater videographers, not just in Mexico, but in the world. And he agreed to be on this project. And so there's glorious footage of both me underwater and sea lions and just fish and the beauty of the world in Mexico. So my story is a little bit more complex because I had different people filming different activities, and still it just felt natural, easy. Everybody was very professional, and yeah, I was surprised by how real and natural it all felt.
So I know, like, you've done the TEDx. I listened to one, which was very nice. As I mentioned prior to recording, I didn't know about the fish, like, the way that. But the Oxford dogs, I hadn't heard of that before, and like, you've got it's like 315,000 views, and it's interesting, and you look very comfortable in that, and it's like, what kind of preparation is needed? Like, you're actually going there and recording there, or is it something? It's not a green screen as such. It's just
No, for the Oxford talk, I flew to Oxford, recorded the next day, and then flew home. I mean, it was a very quick turnaround, but it was a magical day, and they took us into this. I mean, everything in Oxford is imbued with so much history and knowledge, and it was incredible to be on campus. And I loved the room that we recorded in. There's a wall of books behind, and that's real. It's not a green screen. And we did the recording in just a couple of takes. And so I had the talk mostly down, but because it was on camera versus performing on a stage, there was a teleprompter, which was helpful. And we were able to bang it out, so to speak, in a couple of takes. And then record the intro. Everybody walks in and sits in the chair and says, "Hi, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly, and this is my Oxford talk." And so that took a few takes because it was like, I didn't get the right tone on that. But other than that, it was seamless and easy. And then they set up all these beautiful. There was a photo shoot, there was a tea. We had high tea. There was a cocktail where we got to meet the other previous Oxford Talks speakers who were local and just met the community. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful community doing gorgeous work. I highly recommend checking out Oxford Talks on YouTube.
And you, like, to be honest, you wouldn't even know that it was a teleprompter because it just seems so natural, which is, credit to you and credit to them the way that they've done it. But your preparation prior to going there, then, like, how much time did you actually have to put into do? Because I mean, you can't, or can you? Like, how do you actually prepare for something like a teleprompter? Do you just have it on your computer screen as well as the preparation of what you're actually going to say?
Yeah, I that's such a great question. I had it mostly memorized, and one of the things I noticed about memorization for the TEDx talk, which is different than the Oxford talk. So when you do a TEDx talk, they want you word for word on the script that you've submitted. There's no room for improvisation. It's just not about, and I'm a more off the cuffs kind of speaker. So for me, I had to really work hard to memorize to that level. And one of the things that worked very well for me for the TEDx talk was actually writing. So I recorded it, listened to it, walked. So I recited it while listening. I recited it while reading it. But the thing that really was the clincher was writing out my entire talk by writing the first letter only of each word. And when I could write my entire talk by the first letter of each word, then I knew I had it. For the Oxford talk, because I knew there would be a teleprompter, I didn't have to memorize at that level, but I still had it mostly down. So that way I was able to use the teleprompter to cue the next section, or just to make sure I didn't forget something, or, it was more like a cue versus reading every word because I didn't know it. And in that way, it was able to feel much more natural and spontaneous. And I think there might have been a couple of spots where I said something slightly different than what was on the screen, but it didn't matter because it was less stringent in that way than a TEDx talk.
And for the Oxford one, because I mean, I know that with like, say, the TEDx, sometimes it's who you know, sometimes as you make an application, they like it. What's the process for actually getting on the Oxford talks?
Well, I was introduced by Trisha. Trisha Brooke partnered with the creators of the Oxford Talk, Waleed in particular. And so there's an application to fill out. I can, if anybody is interested in doing one, you can contact me and I can put you in touch. There's an application to fill out. There's a fee that covers the recording and it covers the subsequent marketing is not the word, but they're
distribution, let's say.
Distribution, that's the word. Thank you. That's the one I was looking for. And there's a lot of things that they're planning as a community. So they're working on creating a speakers bureau of sorts. And, there's a lot of back-end community building and connecting with other speakers across the world that happens. But initially, I filled out an application and had a conversation with Waleed.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of people that have kind of done the TEDx on the show, and you're the first. Maybe the others have done it. I didn't know about it, or they didn't tell me. But when you do these things, business-wise, the kind of pay back to yourself, because I'm off the cuff kind of thing. I've done an open mic TEDx, but I think I could, just based on my contacts, I think I could do one, but I don't want that because I'm not into the memorization. I'm more into kind of speak from the heart and stuff like that. I'm very good with timing, so timing wouldn't be a problem, but I just said, not for me. But just curious with both of them, business for what's come back, because when you're doing the preparation, that's not a couple of hours. It's a serious amount of time in preparation. So you need to get the So I'm just curious, as it's kind of over the years and after it was released and everything, what kind of, I suppose, clients or doors opening or whatever did you get from both?
Well, I would say it's been connections, more speaking. Sometimes people reach out who are interested in talking about my work or want me to write something or potentially become a client, things like that. And it's true, the preparation, I will say the preparation is not for the faint of heart. You have to write the talk. The great thing about both TEDx and Oxford is they really partner with you to help your talk be better. And in particular, the Oxford Talks process involved several conversations where we came up with my topic together through just talking about what I'm most passionate about. And I so appreciated that part of the process too, to really hone and refine what is it I want to talk about, what is it I want to share, what matters to me, what's going to have the most impact. And that's not something you get, in a regular situation. And so that felt like a huge gift. There was something else I wanted to say about the Oxford Talk, but it flew out of my mind. Maybe it'll come back.
And because you were podcasting as well, so you had Relationships Alchemy was the podcast?
Yeah. So for 2 years, I had a podcast called Relationship Alchemy, which I really enjoyed doing because at the time I was focused on coaching people around relationships, and it was a combination, and it's still available. So go check out Relationship Alchemy podcast. It's on all the platforms. And some of them are solo episodes, some of them are guest episodes. And I love this format. I love getting to have conversations about topics that matter, about things that interest that niche, whatever the niche is for the podcast. And it really opened up, first of all, a lot more comfort in front of a camera and a lot more comfort just being in conversation publicly, which I think we all need to get through if we want to be speakers. Podcasts are an incredible way to get more comfortable speaking because it's intimate. We get to see each other, especially when we're doing it on Zoom, which I love. And I really feel like that podcast has done some great service in the world. So I still sometimes get messages of, oh, this really helped me through a tight spot with my partner or XYZ, things like that. And I ended it because I shifted my coaching focus away from relationships to midlife women who are really in this spot where they want to figure out what's next and who am I now? Maybe the kids have gone to school or maybe they're bored with their work. And there comes a time, I think, in all of our lives, not only women's lives, but but especially women, because we often will set our own ambitions aside to raise children, for example, and then hit a point where it's time to pick it all back up again. And I wanted to go more deeply into this focus because I feel like the midlife women are this incredible, often untapped resource of wisdom and strength and humor and endurance. And we deserve to be heard, to be lifted up, to be encouraged to bring our lives into alignment with our true desires instead of deciding, oh, I'm allowed to want this because my family is okay with it. Or, instead of orienting everything around how we serve everyone else, at some point in everyone's life, the question does come up, well, what about me? And who am I? And what do I want? And where does that fit into the picture? And so I this is one of my favorite places to coach, to work with people about, because it's key to answer that question from a deeper place inside than maybe we have historically accessed. It's not a question that can be answered by the mind. It's a question that's really answered from the soul. And that's my gift, is I help people see the patterns that have been running their life, go underneath them and find a truer, more essential, passionate, that's why I call it activating the passion body, a passionate place from which to choose their next steps.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think the fact that you do so much, you've been coached yourself as well, that you kind of understand the benefit of, because sometimes there's people, they become a coach and they've never had a coach. They do a kind of weekend course, and then unfortunately people don't even know, and they don't know the difference between the good and the bad. But with all your experience, especially for something so important as well, because you're right.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I want to speak to that because I've worked in the wellness space for over 30 years. So and I have a master's in Chinese medicine, and I'm trained in 2 different styles of coaching, et cetera, et cetera. And I agree with you. There's a lot of, especially today, everybody's hanging their shingle out as a coach, and they've never even studied what coaching is. And there's a difference between basic coaching that's like, let's say it's production oriented. Do this, do this, do this. What are your highest priorities? What are your values? What are the actions you're going to take today? Did you do them or not? Etc. Accountability, right? That's a very surface level of coaching that I think most people can do if they're trained. And what I'm doing is really deep soul level work. And the capacity to do that requires experience, as you said. I have, over 30 years of working with people. And it requires that you be walking your own talk. Because this is the other thing I see a lot in the coaching space, is people out here portraying some perfection or arrival, and they're not doing their inner work. Like recently, just this week, an article came out about a prominent person who is out here telling everybody what to do with their life, and his own personal life is in complete disorder and, in fact, rather harmful and destructive, right? So I in 2001, when I was teaching at acupuncture college, I created an elective. We're talking 23 years ago. I created an elective called, I don't remember the name of the elective, but the gist of it was, you can't take a patient where you haven't gone. So if you want to really do deep work, if you want to be a real healer, you have to be doing your own work. There's no way around it. And one of the things my clients appreciate about me the most is that I'm really real with the work that I'm doing with myself. And there's very few things, if anything, that someone can bring to me that I don't have either direct experience with or have seen or know something about. So I don't get knocked out. I don't get shocked. It's very difficult to throw me as a coach because I do my work. And this is something I think is so important for each of us to remember. So if you're looking for a coach, make sure you check out who they are as a person and look at their life as much as you can. Obviously, what's portrayed on social media is largely glossed, but see what you can find out, because you want to work with someone who's actually doing the work and who's not pretending to be great all the time and know everything. I'm very honest when I don't know something, and I'm very honest when I'm down, when I'm up and I'm down. And I create a lot of permission in my spaces to be exactly where you are. Because if we can learn how to navigate the downs more effectively with more kindness and patience, then first of all, we tend to come up with more power and truth. And second of all, we don't walk around fearing that someone's going to find out, oh no, if they find out this thing about me, I'll be exposed. It's like, if you're just real with who you are, there's no worry about exposure. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I mean, with me, it's always been full transparency. It's just like
Yes.
continuous learning and everything. And like, I will never even call even though I've got 6 podcasts and they were like 4s in the top episode, I wouldn't call myself an expert because it's a continuous learning. I'm just like trying to, but yet I see people, they're not even, in the top 10%, and they're kind of making it look like, I will teach you how to do this and get it. And you're going, you're not even there. Like, and unfortunately, they're tricking people into it. And I mean, I've been at a lot of events, so I know a lot of people, different things, and a lot of the people that are out there teaching people about certain things are hurt people, and they're putting up the picture. But if you actually know them, it's like they're the last people you should be getting advice from. So I think you really need to take off the layers and look at the person and go, not just look at the happy picture of look at me on Instagram, because they're all doing that. But it's like you see them when the camera's off and you're going, because people pretend they have the happy life and all this, and it's like they hate each other. And it's like, so.
Right.
And they're not the people to teach it, because they're not going into the intuition. They're not going into the individual, because I think they have like, oh, it's A, B, C, D, you must do this, 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 this. They never kind of adjust, because like, I mean, I know just from listening, Jed, like I'm the same. It's like everyone is different. Some people are like A, and you go fast with them because they want to, you don't tip. But there's other people you have to take it easy, you have to hold their hand and come along. And that's okay as well, because, you adjust for whoever the person is, because at the end of the day, they're paying their hard-earned money to get what you're trying to provide. But unfortunately, so I think it's...
I love that you brought that up. There's no cookie-cutter approach. And I think that's the difference between someone like you or me who has vast experience and can trust what's coming out of our intuition, what's coming out of our heart, because we're in alignment, versus someone who's following a checklist that they learned in a weekend program, right? And they're going to coach everybody the same because they don't know any other way. And it's true. Here's a funny example, because I coach on this deep inner stuff, right? I coach on helping people get aligned with themselves and show up more powerfully in their lives, communicate better, do what they want, etc. And all of a sudden I had a client come, and the thing that was out of alignment for her was not really having a handle on her finances. And so we did a 2-hour session where we co-created what I call a money date. And this is not something I prescribe to everybody. This is something I created just for her, right? But we co-created this money date where, because she was afraid to even look, she was kind of like, with the finances. And I'm like, okay, great. So we did I do a lot of brain training work that aligns the subconscious with the conscious. So we did that part around her fear of money. But then we sat down and we created a date. Okay, on Wednesdays at 5:00, you're going to sit down, you're going to light a candle, you're going to have a cup of tea, you're going to take your bills from the week, you're going to take your statements, you're going to look at everything, you're going to pay your bills, etc. She started this money date, and within a few weeks, she saw all these transactions that were being taken automatically off her credit card, and she saved herself over $1,000 a year by canceling things that she wasn't using, that she hadn't even noticed were getting swiped out of her account. And this, I don't call myself a money coach. I'm not but this is what she needed for her next step in her evolution. She needed to get a handle on her finances and a sense of ownership and power with respect to the money that was coming in and going out. So that's what we did. And then on another session, we worked around her relationships, And another session, we worked around wanting to be more physically active. But this is the thing, when you have someone who is doing the work in their own life, and who has a ton of training and experience, it's very easy to see where it's like a tuning fork that's not vibrating clearly. You can hear where the dissonance is and go straight for that instead of trying to follow some recipe you learned in some dumbass coaching program. It's a very different thing. And so I'm so excited that we're having this conversation, because it's rare that we get to talk this frankly about this epidemic in our industry.
I suppose another thing that a lot of people don't realize is the kind of natural way of healing yourself. And I mean, you said like 30 years you've done the Chinese, so I know that they've quashed a lot of the stuff they've done, but your experience and kind of how beneficial and things that you've seen healing people, because it's all kind of, they make it look like you need the pill, and unfortunately natural is a million times better, but it doesn't, they can't patent that, like, so that's why they quash it.
I want to speak to that, because it's a difference in orientation that completely informs how I coach. So when we talk about Western medicine, which is super useful in the right context. I mean, if I get hit by a truck, I want to go to the...
Yeah, you don't want the acupuncture's not going to stop them.
Acupuncture's not going to do that, right? I need to be sewn up, right? So it has its place, and it's less effective with chronic disorders. And the thing about Chinese medicine that it's a way of looking at life from the perspective of what is the terrain. So the body is, and the body, the mind, the spirit, the energy, the emotions are all understood as the basic terrain or land map in which the symptoms are arising. So in Western medicine, they're looking at the symptoms. But in Chinese medicine, you're always looking at the terrain. Sometimes you do have to address a symptom because it's very loud, but more often when you balance, when you're working to integrate and balance the terrain as much as possible, true balance, I think, cannot really be attained. It's a moving target. But when you're working with the terrain, the symptoms tend to resolve by themselves. So I'm going to bring this into relationships. Let's say you're arguing a lot with your partner. Well, a therapist is probably going to look at the arguments and focus on the arguments. And I, as a person who looks at the terrain, I'm going to look deeper than the argument. Sure, we need to look at the content somewhat, but what's the deeper thing is, how are you communicating? Are you being true to yourself? Is there a boundary that you set that's being ignored? Is there a boundary you should have set that you didn't set? Are you eating, sleeping, pooping, sexing enough? Are you like, what is your nervous system out of whack? Like, if you are not tending to your own nervous system, anything your partner says is going to hit you wrong because you're activated. So it doesn't work to just address the symptom. What you have to address is your nervous system and why you're whacked out all the time and what you can do about that. So as a coach, I'm always looking at this deeper thing. What is the terrain in which the symptom is arising, and how do we improve that? Because our bodies and minds and spirits and emotions are very intelligent and have the capacity to self-regulate and self-heal if given the right ingredients. And very often the right ingredients are sunlight, movement, sleep, food, water, air.
Based on what you said there, like, I mean, I wish all the therapists would actually be doing that, because
same,
like, you see people going to therapists, whether for themselves, which seems to be nearly everybody these days for some reason, but even when there's couples, and it's like they're just reliving the pain of something at the surface. It's like they're putting the cream on the rash instead of what's caused the rash. And
what's caused the rash. Yes, that's such a great example. And therapy has its place. I mean, most of the clients I work with tend to be pretty advanced, like they've done a bunch of work already. I tend to not attract super beginners who have never looked at their stuff, because I do deep work. And I love when someone's been to therapy because they're very self-aware. They know what their triggers are. They know what their reactions are. They can track what's happening. And so then they come to me for the next level of, okay, how do we shift that? Because it's not enough to know your stuff. You also have to know, okay, how do I actually respond in a new way? The nervous system is going to do what it does. Our triggers are what they are. We will likely always is a strong word. We will likely for a long time have a reaction to a particular circumstance that is automatic because that's what's wired into the brain. But what happens as you grow is you can have that automatic reaction, witness it happening, and then there's a gap between the reaction and then choosing a new response. And it's that gap that I help to build. And it's the ability to choose a different response, which then brings you a different result, which then changes your life. That's the magic.
You mentioned, like, even with, like, say, the Chinese medicine, that there's nothing, perfect. It's always in flow. And I think when you're more in tune with yourself, when you're out of whack and you just adjust. And I think you pay attention to whatever is affecting you, and you start studying that, and then you resolve that. But the beauty is, with that armor, you can then help somebody else because you've actually realized, oh, I was doing this because of that, and you're able to help people. But it's strange that most people, I always wonder, like, why isn't everybody like that? But they're not. Like, you wonder why people don't just kind of, okay, I've got this flaw. Why have I got this flaw? How can I stop this flaw? And if society started doing that, I think we'd have a better world.
Oh, you're speaking to the importance of self-responsibility, right? And I have a kind of unique way of working because for me, we need to learn to love all of it. So I have this flaw. It's not, the trick is not to go into shame and self-recrimination and, mea culpa and all the things we do when we discover we have a flaw. The thing is, wow, okay, I have this flaw. Get curious about it. Where did it come from? That's the therapy part. Where did it come from? How is it affecting me now? What can I do differently? When it reveals itself, how do I become self-responsible around, oh, wow, sorry, may I have a redo? My flaw popped up. Let me try that again. That's one strategy is when we notice ourselves automatically reacting out of a flaw, we can request a redo. We can request another attempt to navigate the situation more skillfully. Obviously, the other person has the right to say yes or no, but we can become much more gentle and fluid even with our flaws. And one of the things I end up working a lot with people around is their inner critic. And I always say, your inner critic loves you. So does your judge. So does your self-hatred. So does all the things that tend to shred you in your brain. They actually are different parts of the self that were formed in childhood in response to your environment. And they're just trying to help you survive. And they're just trying to help you get through. But what happens is that their methods are not always great. Like, for example, the inner critic can get so critical that we get paralyzed. That happened to me in graduate school, where I was in my MFA program and I had to write a poem a week, and I revered this teacher that semester. And I got so paralyzed by my inner critic that I couldn't write a word, and then the words I did write were terrible, or at least I thought they were, because my critic was in control. And I really had to do this deep inquiry and work with my critic, and eventually came to a place where I realized that my critic was just trying to help me be better. It was trying to help me write a good poem, but it was going about it all wrong in a way that paralyzed me. So we renegotiated our relationship, where I said, hey, critic, would you be willing to sit back, let me write my first draft, And then I need a skillful editor. Would you be able to come in and be my discernment and help me be detached enough from my creation to help me make it better? I think that would be a much more useful spot for you. And I really need that. I mean, so my critic was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And that's really how I relate with my critic now. And so I do work like this with my clients as well, with whatever inner voices are currently derailing them. I teach them how to have a new relationship with it so that they end up with this inner team that's supportive and knows when to come in at the right time. And that way we get out of the thing that often happens where we suppress, or we try to fight who we are, or we try to pretend, back to the Instagram life, we try to pretend, oh yes, I'm this happy person. And then depression is sitting on your shoulder and you're trying to kill it. And it's like, no, depression's on your shoulder, maybe because you need to sit down and slow down. Maybe depression is a sign that you need to reorient, that something's out of alignment and you need to go very, very slowly and until you can actually feel what your desire is again, because everything feels flat right now. Maybe it's as it should be because you're supposed to find some new direction. So I hope that's not too radical for your audience, but that this is, it has a long history, this kind of work. It's called parts work, and I've studied it through 4 different traditions. And it's a very powerful way of working with our minds and with ourselves to really come to a place of self-acceptance and self-love. That's not this kind of, everything's fine, and underneath you're like, that's not fake like that. That's not bypassing, but it's actually integrated, where your shadow is integrated with your light. And that's really, I think, the key for all of us. If we're going to take this planet in a better direction, we have to start navigating our shadows differently, because right now our shadows are acting out in really unimaginable ways.
Just finally, as you mentioned the poetry, and you've got the books and the poetry. My own experiences, I know I used to love poetry, and then when I went into secondary school, we got a Christian brother that was like, he looked like he was 100, but I don't know what age he was. But he used to make us learn 2 poems a night, and we had to write them out. And basically, when you get it wrong, I don't know, was it 100 times you had to write the poem? And it just made me go from liking poetry to hating it based on just his stupidity of making us learn. But I know that, like, you go on stage and, even on your Oxford talk and everything. So, like, what's kind of poetry to you, and because I know it's like a form of meditation as well to people, like, because you're going deep within. So you may just touch on the poetry.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I think school is where poetry goes to die. So it's a really true example that you've shared. And to me, poetry is attention. It's paying deep attention to life and allowing life to impact you, and allowing imaginative connections to be made between images, things you see or things you hear that remind you of something, that take you somewhere deeper. There's different types of poets, more intellectual poets, nature poets, etc. I would say I'm a meditative poet, where it's really for me about being in a moment where I'm seeing or hearing or feeling something, and then allowing myself to open to what could this be connected to, whether sometimes it's not a big epiphany, sometimes it's a very quiet thing, but sometimes it is a big epiphany. And I feel, even if we're not poetry oriented, think about the biggest moments of life: birth, marriage, death. We turn to poetry because it expresses the inexpressible. Unexpressible? It expresses what cannot be expressed by prose. And I think that is the power of poetry. Even for the people who say they hate poetry, they will often look for a poem at a time of intensity. And to me, that I'm if you haven't been able to tell from our conversation thus far, I am a student of intensity. I'm a lover of intensity, whether that's diving in the ocean, whether that's coaching, being on the precipice with a client and waiting for the revelation to come. I love anything that brings me into the moment, that makes me be present, that kind of concentrates my mind, and meditation included. And for me, poetry is that. When I'm engaged with poetry, I'm showing up to the world in a more alert way, with my attention out. I'm not in here yammering on about my faults. I'm out here looking at, oh, wow, that flower. I just wrote a poem about a bee that was feeding on a flower in our yard that I didn't know was going to bloom. It bloomed but while we were away. And so all of a sudden there's this explosion of orange flowers in the yard, and there's a bee feeding on it. And that sent me in all these different directions. And I was able to write this beautiful poem, essentially because I saw a bee feeding on a flower. But I love that. I love that. I love being awake to life in that way, with my attention out.
Maria Elizabeth, you might thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know where they can find you.
Oh, yes. Well, my website is mariaelizabethmali.com, my name. All my socials are the same as well, so just search for Maria Elizabeth Mali. And I do have a quiz for midlife women. It's called your Grown-Ass Power Quiz. And this is a fun quiz that shows you which of 5 passion body archetypes is your dominant archetype, the strengths you can lean on, the foibles you might need to focus on to improve. And that you can find either on my homepage at mariaelizabethmali.com, or you can go to yourpowerquiz.com.
Okay. I'll make sure I put both websites on the show notes, both on the audio and the video. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I loved our conversation. Thank you for your great questions.
Thank you. Well, that's all for the Speaking Podcast. We find all the episodes on speakingpodcast.com. Make sure you share it with your friends, because there's plenty of people, especially women, now that their children have left the nest and they could do with a bit of help. And I think this episode, there's plenty of things, and even those that are curious about poetry as well. I think the way that Maria Elizabeth mentioned that at the end, it was touching, and I think you're dead right, because I thought it was at funerals and stuff like that we read the verse, we create the verse, and we love it. And it's like I was telling myself the story again, because I'm kind of that I didn't like poetry, but in reality I do. I love it. So thank you for that.
Ireland has a great tradition of fantastic poets, so you're in good company.
So, until next week, take care. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you'll find my 6 podcasts on bio.link/podcaster. And also, if you'd like to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour, you'll find the information on that or on the QR code that's there. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, and share with your friends, because it really helps. Until next week, take care.